Welcome back to the table for the Friday, September 13, 2024 installment of Market Plus. Back with us again, Kristi Van Ahn-Kjeseth. Maybe we should just change the name of this podcast. I keep saying back from the table.
Right?
That doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I like
table.
it. Right? It's not much of a kitchen table, though.
No.
You could, like,
It'd be
make
a heck
it nice.
of a kitchen if you had this table.
Right?
Wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You were on a panel this week up in
Yes.
North Dakota
Yes.
with our friend Naomi.
Yep.
What's the sentiment there right now? What are people asking you?
Yeah, they aren't happy.
Prices or
I think just in general, I think that people in general have a lot of crop around that they don't have a home for. I think that a lot of producers are kind of stuck in this coulda, woulda, shoulda type of a situation. And I think we were at a farm show in early August, and we got that hint from there. We obviously knew from quarterly grain stocks there was a lot of grain on hand, but I think you just saw a lot of guys shell off corn at the lows trying to clean out the bins. And now we're trying to move forward and get a game plan. And so I just think people are a little sad about it in general.
Sad, it seems more anger in a lot of days. But do you, Naomi talks about this a lot, and I'm sure she did on this week. Do you think the harvest low is in now? Yeah,
I mean, on corn I do, right? So could we test 385 for that D-slow again? Yeah, I think with some harvest pressure we could. But I thought that corn showed such resilience out of the crop report. I think that corn has kind of pegged itself to wheat as well, and I think wheat feels friendly right now. So I feel like corn does do really well right now. And not only that, we're just over a 2 billion bushel carryout in corn, and that is a manageable carryout level for corn. It's not great, but it's manageable.
Is that maybe why the market responded maybe more muted, given the increase in the size of the crop, but it's like, oh, that number is something I can handle?
Yeah, so I send out a message right away when a crop report comes out, and I was going through the details, and corn started going down 7. And, you know, now you hear me mumble, and I was like, why is it going down 7? And I think the initial reaction was that yield was so large that you had that panic right away. Oh my goodness, yield came in so much higher than anticipated. We need to sell this. But when everything shakes out and you bring it down, the carryout is still shrinking. And I said this earlier, I do think that that might be one of the higher print yields that we see. I think demand has been doing a good job keeping up. And so I feel like corn has done a good job finding that low. Seasonally, we're supposed to wait a couple weeks, so you could see that. But man, I just feel like it wants to say it was in, let's move forward. Doesn't mean it necessarily has to rally, but it feels good.
You mentioned wheat, which is our first question here that came. This one is from Eric in Wisconsin. Wants to know, Kristi, is the wheat market buying planting acres right now?
I think I don't know if that's its main focus as much as it's just putting in, you know, everything that's going on around the world, the dry concerns that you're starting to pop up, but it does need to buy some acres. You know, when you look at it in general, I just feel like wheat is not profitable compared to the rest of the crops. And I also think that guys are continuously having issues with wheat, one form of another, vomitoxin, scab, falling numbers when you talk about spring wheat and all of that, that it makes it so difficult. I would hate growing a crop that you have so many unknowns for it, so that would be tricky for me. But I do think in general it's building that economic kind of picture behind it with everything that's going on around the world. And to be honest, sorry, real quick, the world numbers are decreasing, and it's one of the only ones that's really decreasing for carryout levels, so it has that story behind it.
You had a really good number on corn. Do you have a really good number on wheat where you like this thing right now?
Yeah, you know, I don't really have any projections quite yet. You know, it's kind of tricky because we deal with a lot of spring wheat, which is kind of different than most of the show's audience. So it makes it a little bit different when you see it. But I do feel good, and I would say that you could consistently run a stop probably on the lows from a couple days prior. If you're saying, I want to let this run, I have some wheat I want to sell, I would treat it as just putting a line in the sand from the low 2 days prior and keep lifting that up. As long as we rally, I would give it some time, but I would be moving up that stop level along with it.
Sounds like a strategy you might want to do. I think you were talking about in cattle too. We have a question. Yes. Hold on. You get to hold just a minute. She's so excited to answer your question, Scott in Wisconsin. Is cattle still king?
I think so. I mean, it's so tricky. You know, to me, cattle is the one with the most unknowns right now with the stock market. So we have interest rate talks happening right now. Next week, we're going to have an answer on that. And, you know, I think most of the market's feeling pretty good with that quarter. And I think as long as we can get that and keep trucking along and see those numbers come, I think in general, the economy feels really well. And if you look at it, the stock market, it tanked and then came back, and we were able to rally, you know, almost 1,000 points in a matter of 3 days off of the low. And so those type of things are really helping it. However, I do feel like the futures market, when you look at the chart, has consolidated. And so we really need to see it break out of this zone before I can feel really good about it. But so far, cash has been the king of the situation, to be honest.
Which was a follow-up that somebody had on Facebook to that question, was about, don't you mean cash? Again, I would dive back in there for a minute on cash versus futures, because that had been a story midsummer, early summer, that had kind of flipped. Do you see it going back?
No, I feel like cash is still really strong, and I feel like it's going to continuously be strong. And I think that as long as you're not seeing, you know, the heifer situation change, I do think that that is going to be what controls this market. And sometimes it's really depressing to see the futures board drop off like it is, and then you look at kind of where the sales came in and they're not all that different. So it has been that unique situation that you almost have to treat them like two completely different markets.
All right, I asked you about a harvest low. Let's ask Tom's question. Have we reached bottom for prices? So you talked about corn, you think that low might be in. What about beans? What about wheat?
I think wheat, yes. I can lump corn and wheat together. Beans, I don't know about that one. It makes me a little bit nervous just because we're building so much off of this dry story. And, you know, sometimes we have a short memory, but it's hard to sustain a dry story rally this early in the season, right? So if you think about our growing season, when we're dry coming into planting, we might get a little bit of attention on it, but there is so much more important time moving forward on that. Now, if we were dry during, you know, pollination for us, or when you're talking about beans, you know, not the best finish for beans, but if we were dry into that August timeframe, such a different story than it is right now. And so it's really hard for me to put all my eggs in a basket. And to be honest, the carryout or the production out of Brazil is forecasted so high that even if we saw some acres not planted due to dry concerns or some yield reduction off of that, you're still looking at a monster carryout out of Brazil. And you look at the world carryout, that's the one that is skyrocketing out of here. And we really need to come back and focus and say, how many beans does China really want? We know that their appetite is for Brazil's beans. And so I have a problem saying, could we drastically change that? Now, you do start to see the extended models for like the 3-month out forecast start to turn a little bit hot, a little bit dry for South America in general, but that's so far away. I have a really hard time putting emphasis on that right now.
Well, the old saying, sounds like it holds for down there. If you plant in dust,
the bins will bust. If you plant in mud, the crop's a dud.
So you think that holds down there too, like it does up here?
I think so. You know, that's a sentiment or a line that's been told to me since I was little, right? I heard my dad say it all the time. And I think it's a very true statement. And I think that's kind of where we got ourselves in trouble this year, bringing it back to the U.S., is that we planted in the mud for quite a bit of people. And I think that they were looking at this situation and said, our crop is going to have such shallow root systems. We're going to need timely rain consistently, or this crop is going to be toast. And that's what we ended up doing. We ended up getting timely rains over and over again that it was able to skirt by.
Okay, this is the bearish view of many things, but this is, I guess, the realistic, and we all have to do our jobs just to make sure we talk about this question. Junior in South Dakota, online on X. How long until we see sub 350 corn and $8 beans?
So if we're talking cash, you know, some areas are 350-ish right now. But as far as it goes for corn, I don't know. I don't know if you're going to see that. $8, you printed in the 8s in North Dakota earlier into this like a month ago or so. You were putting 8s. And I looked at that, and I have a feeling that's probably why I was as aggressive as I was on bean marketing over this last couple weeks. It was I do not want to sell in the 8s for beans. Like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And so I really made that mantra to say, hey, we're not going to do it if we have the opportunity, and if we really need to, buy a call. And so I feel like that's really aggressive, but there's a lot that can change over the next 4 months for beans that I would say, if you were saying, could corn do it or beans do it, I would say I'd be more keen that beans could have a print.
Yeah, that's what I've taken from you. If I've taken anything away today, it's been your love of beans. Cotton, the Deep South rained, but not necessarily in cotton growing areas.
Right.
There's still a lot of drought down there too.
Yeah, and I think cotton's trying to build off of that. I think that cotton wants to do something, but it seems like there's that resistance point around $70 that it just has not been able to. I think if we could come in here and see some continued export demand, we could see China be a bigger player into it. You could break through that, but I would lump as, say, if I had to pick two markets that I feel like Q1 of 2025 could surprise the market and really do something, I would put them with wheat and cotton. So I think you could put them both together on that.
Hold on, I got to write this down.
Right.
Wheat and cotton. Okay. What about crude?
Yeah, so crude oil, if you look at a chart, right, it's well beyond 2 standard deviations away from linear regression, a lot out of it. But what it's saying is that we've really dropped off, right? And so you're starting to see that trend. What we do know is there's a presidential election coming up, and typically crude comes into the election starting to drop off, so it can be a talking point for the current administration. And I think you're seeing that. One thing that I will say surprises me is that we haven't started to rebuild that supply, that reserve, since we've gotten as far as we did. And so maybe there's a little bit more to come. But given the world dynamics happening right now, I'm surprised that you haven't seen more movement overall. But we will be looking at some form of ownership moving forward in the near term for crude oil, just to kind of cover those needs into spring and summer. It could be as simple as a call spread in crude oil, but we will be doing something just because where it is at on a chart compared to linear regression.
This is a borderline political question, but sometimes we see this when the stories start to be written more mainstream about maybe we've hit peak driving or peak oil use.
Yes.
Does that change any of the old way of thinking with crude? Traditional way of thinking, not old way.
You know, I think one thing that surprises me the most about crude oil is how far it's dropped off, how far RBOB has dropped off, and I don't feel like we've really seen it at the pumps so much. So I think there must be some sort of disconnect there. There must still be that demand there for the driving side of things, because to be honest, it took us into Iowa to be able to see a 2. We're still having a lot of 3s for our gas prices, and if you look at charts, they've drastically dropped off. So I think you can talk about that. You can say that the demand has decreased, but we're not seeing that on the cash side of things. Kind of like that separation in cattle, right? Mm-hmm. Cash futures, they're not correlating to me right now when you look at crude oil and unleaded gasoline.
Well, time to fill up the car and head back home. Kristi, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Kristi Van Ahn-Kjeseth. Next week, we will look at the attempt to solve the problem of safety when entering the grain bin. And we'll also have the commodity market analysis of Don Rose. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week.